In any system that allows users to create accounts and log in, we also need a way of resetting their credentials if they were to be lost or forgotten. Now, typically speaking, you should always create a unique password for every online service that you use. And if you do that, it's very easy to misplace or forget passwords unless you use something like LastPass, which I highly recommend you guys do use. It's an awesome service. But we want to be able to have people to be able to reset their passwords without pestering administrators. So we definitely need some sort of password reset system. Now, resetting a user's password is a lot more complicated than it might seem because of the variety of security implications of such a system. Poorly implemented password reset methods will undoubtedly open a massive attack vector to your application. So we want to avoid all that while remaining fairly simple and straightforward. There's this wonderful blog post written by Troy Hunt, who is a security researcher or does a lot of security related things and blogs about them, and it goes over this particular algorithm we're going to be implementing and a lot of the reasoning behind why it's structured in a particular way. I highly recommend everybody goes and reads this blog post. The first part of this video, we're going to do a basic overview of this. I'm basically going to be paraphrasing this blog post, and then we're effectively going to be implementing it. So, password reset tokens are really the only viable way to handle resetting passwords. And what do I mean by a password reset token? Well, if we look at this flowchart, which you can also find at the bottom of the blog post, we see a fairly straightforward and common password reset algorithm that many of you probably have experience with using. And we'll see that it starts off with the user entering an email address in the password reset form. He goes on and on and on. We generate a random token and add it to our user entity. We then send them an email with that token. The user goes to that page with that token in the URL. If it's valid, we allow them to insert a new password, and then we, of course, remove the token from storage. We email the user telling them that their password has changed, and then the flowchart ends. So, first of all, one of the things that you'll notice about this flowchart is that at the beginning, the user enters the email address and password reset form, and then we advise user an email. Oh, that's a poorly constructed sentence. We send them an email that gets sent regardless of whether or not, or we tell the user. I can't read English apparently. This is actually a very properly structured sentence. It's just my brain doesn't work, and that's very small text on a very small resolution on a monitor that's far away from my face. So that's my excuse, I'm sticking to it. So let's go ahead and read this box. Advise user an email has been sent whether an account exists or not, and that's very important. You'll commonly notice that in web applications that have been properly implemented, when you try to reset a password, or even when you try to log into the site, it never exposes to you whether or not you tripped upon a valid account. For example, when you log into most websites, it'll tell you that your username and your password or your password are incorrect, as opposed to telling you, oh, you got the username right, but your password's wrong. And obviously a system that could say you got the password right, but your username wrong is very poorly implemented, and you should run away and never register on that site. But the point is that the websites or web applications, or just applications in general, should never inform a person whether or not an account exists that matches any criteria, whether that criteria be an email account or email address or a username. And that's an important security feature because we don't want people to be able to assess whether a particular person has an account on that service or not. I can think of a lot of cases in a particular industry where this would be incredibly important, but I think this practice extends to virtually all applications that accept user input, or accept accounts, new accounts, registered accounts. You know what I'm saying. So whether or not an email address exists in the system, we want to tell them to check their email address. So whether or not we actually sent them a password reset email, tell them to check their email address. If they got it right and if they have an account, they'll see an email. If they're just fishing for information for whatever reason, then obviously there won't be an email, or there may not be an email address associated with that particular user, and in that case no email is sent, but the user is none the wiser. So this prevents us from opening up a potential attack vector into our application. So if the account doesn't exist, we just don't do anything. So that's fine. We just don't do anything. We just leave the system or just leave the workflow entirely. If the account does exist, we want to make sure to create and store a new timestamped reset token. The way we're going to be implementing this is in a similar way that we implemented our verify email token, and we're also going to have that sit side by side with a date time that'll indicate when the password token was generated. Now, this password token is going to be just uniquely randomly generated and stored in our database so that it's very difficult to guess, and it has no correlation to the ID or username or email of that account. This is important because we don't want people to be able to guess reset tokens. So we don't want to do things like hash the user ID or hash the user email or some other method that a person might consider, because that makes it possible for an attacker to generate a reset token based off information they might already know about that account that they're trying to exploit. So we want to make sure it's a randomly generated token. We also want to timestamp it, either in a cryptographically secure way by encoding the timestamp into the token, or more simply by storing a date time side by side with the token. This makes it so we can expire tokens. Expiring tokens is important because we don't want a person to later down the road maybe gain access to somebody's email account and then use old password reset links to reset their password on other accounts. And there's a variety of other security related reasons why we do not want to allow the password reset to exist, or the password reset token to exist, for longer than a set period of time. That set period of time in our system will be, I guess, an hour, 30 minutes maybe, something that a user would reasonably be able to check their email and click on a link. So 30 minutes would probably be fine. The lower the better. Obviously you don't want to make it like more or like shorter than maybe 15 minutes because users are sometimes slow to do things. And the email itself, the reset email, might take a while to get to their inbox, so we want to account for that as well. Once we generate the token and we timestamp it either by doing something fancy or doing something simple, we send them an email with the password reset URL. Password reset URL is just a URL that includes the token in the query string, just like what we did with our verification emails. Once the user navigates the reset URL, we check to see if the reset token is valid. So a valid reset token is A, one that exists, and B, one that has not expired. If it's not, we tell the user to start again. If it is, we do the second check to make sure it's unexpired. If it's not expired, we can optionally further identify verification, secret question, or two-factor authentication. Secret question would be something like what you would do with your online banking, what's your favorite pet, where did you go to high school, or insert question that a person who can Google your name can ascertain on their own, therefore rendering security questions completely pointless unless you do something like me, which is to take the text of the question, MD5 it with assault, and use that as my answer. I recommend people do that because secret questions are just terrible. I hate them. It's like I go to my I go to my bank account and sometimes it asks me, different different questions like where did I first work, or where did I grow up, or where was I born? Stuff that pretty much anybody with an email address or with a internet access can ascertain about me and guess. But anyway, regardless, we're not going to be doing that, nor are we going to be doing two-factor authentication. An example of two-factor authentication would be sending a user a text message with a special code to their mobile device and have them enter that code. That's a lot of complexity. It is important. Two-factor authentication is a very nice feature, but it's a bit of overkill for what we're trying to accomplish right now. Then we allow the user to change their password, we delete the reset token from storage, and we email the user the confirmation of the change, and then we end. So a couple other important things that you'll notice about this: we never, ever, ever send the users back their password. Email is not secure. It just isn't. It's not a secure protocol. It's not something that you should ever count on being secure. Never, never, never send a user a password, whether it's their own password or a password that was uniquely generated for them, in an email. The only exception to this is, I guess, if you force them to change, if you generate a new password, you send them the password through an email, and then you force them to change it once they log in after that. That's kind of okay, and it's almost exactly like this system. And if you add a expiration date on that password, it would be even closer to this system. But regardless, it's important that you never send passwords, and don't try to be clever by encoding users' passwords into images either. That is also ridiculously insecure. Furthermore, if your system is capable of retrieving the plain text of a user's password after they've registered, then your security is broken already, and you should probably get on that and start hashing your passwords properly. But regardless, this is the system. This is what we're going to be implementing. I'm going to have this handy little flowchart over on my other monitor, and that's what we're going to be doing. If you want to know more about this topic, go to this blog post. It is titled "Everything You Ever Want to Know About Building a Secure Password Reset Feature." So fairly self-explanatory. It's pretty comprehensive, and you should also subscribe to this guy's blog. Anyway, so that's going to be the theory of this particular video. So let's go ahead and implement this. So to implement it, the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need to close Photoshop. I was originally going to draw that diagram out, but then I was thinking, well, wait a sec, I'm basing this off of an existing flowchart that I can just use my mouse cursor to point at. No point in drawing it out. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to first add the properties on the user entities that will allow us to store a password reset token in the database. So there's two properties that we need to add, one for the password reset token and the other one for the expiration date of that token. So I'm going to go into my data project, I'm going to go into entities, and I'm going to go into user. Now instead of storing this, I could store this on a different table if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to store this straight up on the user account, the user entity, because, well, the user will only ever have one reset password token created for him at a time. Once he consumes that token, it'll be invalid, and if he tries to generate another token, that'll become invalid. So I don't see any reason to separate this out into a different entity, unless, of course, we wanted to abstract the concept of temporary use tokens and store them in some sort of more abstract entity, but I don't want to deal with that. Let's just keep this simple. So I need a public, go under sharper, there you go, public string reset password token. It's going to be in the same format and generated the exact same way as our verify email token, so I'll give it a max length of 64, just like what we did with our verify email token. Then I want to go ahead and do a public date time, not data type, date time, which will bring in a using system at the top. It'll say public date time reset password token expires at. Okay, let's go ahead and make this nullable and pray that Entity Framework understands what a nullable struct is. I don't think I've ever used a nullable date time with Entity Framework before. Hopefully it'll generate the proper SQL for it, but we'll certainly find out here in a moment. So again, these are the only two properties we need to add to our user entity: his current reset password token, as well as the date time in which that password token is going to expire. Because we modified our entity, I'm going to load up my PMC, Package Manager Console, and type in, once it initializes. Well, first I'll set my default project to data, of course, because we're working on our data project. And then I'm say add migration. Let's let's call this migration reset password token. Hit enter. Let Entity Framework do all of its magic. This is such a time saver. I mean, pretty much every ORM I've used requires that you handwrite your migrations. With the exception of Rails, I believe Rails does a scaffolding of a migration in the case that you create a new entity, but I'm not entirely sure that it's capable of doing that when you modify an entity. But this feature of Entity Framework of allowing us to auto-generate migrations is incredibly powerful. Okay, so now we have our reset password token and our reset password token expires at. Let's go ahead and add a unique constraint on our reset password token in the very ridiculously unlikely event that we ever generate two reset password tokens that are similar, or not similar, but exactly the same. Like I said, it's incredibly unlikely that that'll ever happen, but we want our database to be as consistent as possible. Although we do most of our validation with application level logic, we want to make sure that in the case where we can, or the cases where we can, we take advantage of the database to enforce particular constraints about our system. And in this case, I really want the constraint of a reset password token being unique enforced by the database engine itself. So I'm going to say add index. No, I'm not. I'm going to say create index. And I'm going to, for the table, I'm going to call it users. For the column, I'm going to say reset password token. And for unique, I'll set that to true. Don't want to worry about the name. That'll be auto-generated for us. Cluster, don't want to worry about it. And then anonymous arguments is irrelevant in this case. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and open up our package manager console again and type in update database. That's another nice thing. It never occurred to me to use the package manager console for things like updating the database and whatnot. Typically in the past I wrote a bat file that executed my migrations against my development environment. But it's very nice that I'm able to invoke this directly from the package manager console. Now that it's done, let's just really quickly double check that our reset token field was added. Note that reset password token and reset password token expires at are both nullable columns. That's incredibly important. Let's locate our users table and let's open up its definition. And we indeed see that we have a verify email token and a reset password token and an expires at. Note that the reset password token is marked as unique. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and start on our front end. So our front end is mostly just going to be a form or a couple of actions on our front end and a couple of mailers. So let's go ahead and get that process started. I'm going to scope my Solution Explorer to my web project because we're going to be working exclusively in the web project for the rest of the video. Then I'm going to go ahead and add a new controller for my reset password. It's pretty common. I mean, technically I could stuff my register actions, my auth actions, and my reset password actions all into the same controller. But I find that separating your controller by feature is, as opposed to category of features, is a lot more clean than the alternative. The only exception to that is when there's a distinct entity involved or a distinct resource involved with a particular group of actions. That's why, for example, my admin, I stuffed everything that has to do with users in the users controller. But on the front end, because we're worried more about processes than data, I want to segregate my actions based off of feature as opposed to resource. So on my controller's namespace, I'll add a new class, and I'm going to call it password reset controller. He's going to inherit from controller. I'll go ahead and just go in full screen too, because I like full screen mode. And then I'm going to say public AR. Let's do index for the start. That means the URL to this will be password reset as opposed to password reset / something else, which is kind of nice. And the index is going to return a view, and it's going to have a view model. Now, we're not going to populate any data in the view model from our index get action for now. Of course, we might change our minds later. But the view model is going to have on it the form field that's going to be posted back to the controller that will represent the email address that the user entered into the form. So the view model name, continuing with the conventions that we've used previously, is going to be password reset index. Of course, that class doesn't exist yet, but it will. And then next up, I'm going to write an HTTP post index that takes in a password reset index form, and it'll simply say return view form for now. Very shortly, we'll actually add some logic into here. So now we have to go ahead and create the password reset index. So I'll jump over into my Solution Explorer. By the way, I did that with the very handy keyboard shortcut Control-Alt-L. I've been using that keyboard shortcut throughout this video series so far, but I don't think I've ever pointed it out. If you ever want to get into your Solution Explorer, Control-Shift-L, or Control-Alt-L, sorry. So we're going to create a new class in our ViewModels namespace, and we're going to call it password reset index. Again, it's not going to contain any data that we send in from our action, but it will contain data that will be bound to by our HTML form. Password reset index will have a public string email. Email will be required, and it will have a data type of email address. So note that me adding those data annotations does indeed bring in the using system component model data annotations statement at the top. Now that we've done that, we know enough or have enough of our backend code written so we can write our front end. So in my views folder, I'm going to add another folder called password reset, and then I'm going to add a shishtaml called index, and it's going to take in a model of password reset index, and then everything else in this file is going to be blanked out. So our index.cshtml, which again was placed into our password reset folder, is going to be empty for now, other than our model, or view model definition. So let's go ahead and fill it with stuff. For like the 10 millionth time in this video series, I've forgotten the Bootstrap 3 syntax for forms, so I'm going to take a look at my auth login to refresh my memory. Okay, form group and form control. Form group, form control, form group, form control. Let's go ahead and open up an HTML form in our password reset index file by doing HTML begin form. We'll put in our HTML validation summary at the top. We'll then do div class form group, with an HTML label for email, and then an HTML text box for email with HTML attributes. The HTML attribute that we're going to be passing in is form control. Next up, we're going to open up a paragraph, and then we're going to do input type equals submit value equals reset password, class equals button, button small, button primary, and then we'll do or HTML action link go back, or do I do go back or do a cancel? I can't remember the terminology that I used. Let's just say cancel. And then have this link point to the index action of the home controller. The last thing we want to make sure to do is name our form. We want to go ahead and throw in an H1 at the top to say reset password. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit F6. And we're going to get an error in our controller. And the reason we got an error in our controller is because we added this class to our ViewModels namespace, but we never imported the ViewModels namespace into this file. So that'll fix that issue. Hit F6. Actually, I need to start my web server. Oh, Visual Studio is deciding to crash on me. Blah, 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 blah. There we go. I'm going to hit Control F5 to launch the web server. And then I'm going to try going directly to our action. And then I'm going to see what happens. So let's go into password reset. We get reset password, email, reset password, or cancel. The cancel link does bring us home, but then because we're not logged in, it pushes us to the login screen. If I hit reset password, it'll say the email field is required. If I type in something, it won't do anything because we haven't added any logic. Now, before we implement the logic of the reset password, I do want to go ahead and come into the login page, and I want to add a button for resetting our password. So to do that, I'm going to jump into auth login.cshtml, and then I'm going to say for action link about your password. So that'll be an action of index and a controller of password reset. Coming back here and refreshing the page, we now have a nice little link at the bottom of our login form. And if we click on it, it'll take us back here. If we hit cancel, it'll take us back here. So a nice little form we got here. Okay. So let's go ahead and start implementing the meat of our password reset index post action. Now the first thing I want to do is I'm going to remove that code, and I'm going to say if not model state is valid, return view form. So if they didn't type in an email address, then simply show the form back to the user. Then we want to load up the database, and we want to find if an email address does indeed exist. So because we need the database, I'm going to go ahead and add a private read-only MMO database context, which of course brings in buzzmmo.data at the top, underscore database equals new MMO database context, so that we have access to our entities. Then I'm going to say, well, I don't have to do any using or anything. That'll be handled for us automatically. I'm going to say var user equals database.users.single or default. Now, typing in single or default will, of course, bring in system.link at the top of our file. And I'll say t goes into email equals forum.email. Then we can say if user is null, then return redirect to action, and then we're going to want a new action name that is that the user's redirected to in the case of him properly submitting the form. And again, we're going to send them to this page or this confirmation page regardless of whether or not we found a user in the database that matched the email he typed in. So what do we want to call that action? I don't know. Confirm. Confirm short for confirmation. So the confirmation page that their email address has been received by our system. That's a good enough name, I guess. All right, so the next thing that we got to do is now that we've established that a user exists, we got to generate a token that will allow them to view their password, or not view their password, or reset their password. I think right now is a good opportunity maybe for some refactoring, because if I look in my register controller, you'll notice that I do implement a token generation, or do implement token generation logic right here in our controller. I think what I want to go ahead and do is set up the user entity with two methods on him, one for generating the verify email token and the other one for generating the password reset token. That way we can centralize the code that generates tokens, which will mean that if we wanted to change the way we generate our tokens in the future, we can do so in one place. So the way that I'm going to refactor this code is I'm going to take it and cut it. And remember, this is the register controller on our user register action. And I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to say user dot generate email verification token. So we're going to have to add a method on our user entity called generate email verification token. You can do this one of two ways. You can load up the user class directly and type it in down here, or we can just tell ReSharper to generate it for us, which all that does is it creates this method right here at the bottom of our user entity. Remember, our user entity is in our buzzmmo.data.entities class. Then I'm going to paste, and then I'll hit import types for pasted code. And now we have our token generation placed into our user entity. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of saying user.verify email token, I'm just going to say verify email token equals blah. Okay, I'm going to do one more bit of refactoring on the generate email verification token before I create the other method for generating the password reset token. So let's just go back to our register controller for now and make sure that that method is indeed being called. It would be really nice if we had tests in place, but testing would just add a lot to this part of the video series, and I really want to get into the server stuff as soon as possible, or the game stuff as soon as possible, so we're not going to worry about that. But this would be a great, if we had tests, they would be very nice to have right now, because it would verify that our refactoring is correct. But I'm just going to look at the code and say, you know what, unless C# just doesn't work in the way I expect it to, this code should work as it did before. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to abstract, or not abstract, but factor the code that generates the token into its own method. So I'm going to say private string generate random token, and then I'm going to say var using random equals new RNG crypto service provider, var buffer equals new byte. If it looks like I'm just copying the code from the top, that's because I am. Random get non-zero bytes. But copying and pasting code all around the place makes for a very confusing video, so I just wanted to type this stuff out myself. And I'll say return convert.toBase64 string buffer. Now we don't need to I hate this word so much. Parameterize this 32 here, because both the tokens we'll be generating are going to be 32 bytes long. But because this method is now centralized, if we ever need to change the amount of bytes generated, we can just turn that into a parameter. I don't want to over-engineer this. I just want to have our refactoring result in simpler code, not more complex code. So now I can replace this entire method of generate email verification token simply with verify email token equals generate random token. And then I can simply delete all the existing code. Okay, we need one more method now. Now that we've finished that refactoring, we can go ahead and say public void generate password reset token, which is going to say reset password token. Let's keep the terminology the same. Let's say generate reset password token, not generate password reset token, so that our terminology is on par with our property names. Then I'll say generate random token, and then I'll say reset password token expires at datetime.utcnow.add minutes 30. So that'll tell our user entity that our password reset token will expire at 30 minutes from now. Okay, now that I've done that, oh yeah, make sure that you use UTC now and not now, because we're going to be also using UTC now when we compare this date. And we want to make sure that whenever we have invariant date times, and by that I mean date times that are specific to our system, but not to our locale, we want to always use UTC now. And then if we need to display those dates, we can convert it into the user's time zone. But again, all dates that touch the database should be in universal time, or UTC. What does UTC stand for? Universal time something. I totally can't remember. That's something I should know. Coordinated Universal Time. That's what it is. The reason that I forgot it is because the acronym does not line up with the sorting or order of the words that it expresses, which that is a really stupid acronym. It should be CUT. Anyway, now that we've created our generate password reset token method, we can come back to our password reset controller and we can say user.generate reset password token and then database.save changes. Then we need to send an email. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say new users mailer, and that's of course going to bring in using buzzmmo.web.mailers at the top. New users mailer dot reset password, and then I'm going to pass the user entity into the reset password method, just as we did with the verify email, and then I'll do .send. Finally, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say var redirect to action confirm. Okay, so there's two more things we need to do to implement this step of the system, and that is we need to write our confirm action and we need to write our mailer. So let's start with our confirm action since we're already sitting here in the controller. I'm going to do public AR confirm. Confirm will simply return view. Because this can be a static view, I'm not going to worry about creating a view model for it. Typically I do anyway, but So now I'm going to create a new Razor MVC view inside of the password reset folder, which my arrow keys are acting up. Password reset. I'm going to create a new Razor MVC view, and I'm going to call it confirm. And then I'm just going to delete everything in this file. I'm not going to have a model definition at the top of this file because we're not accepting a view model. Since we don't have a view model class, there's nothing that we can put in the top of the file to describe what view model we want to use. And this is just simply going to say, check your email. A password reset link has been sent to your email address. Okay, so that's our confirm action. It's really just a static page with static text. So now that we've done that, the next thing we need to do is create our mailer. So if I jump into our users mailer class, which again, our users mailer class is going to be under our mailers namespace, users mailer. This class was generated in a previous video when we showed registration. Inside our users mailer, I'm going to have it take a user as a parameter. Then I'm going to, on our view bag, I'm going to say viewbag.username equals user.username, viewbag.token equals user.password reset password token. Then I'm going to delete this comment because it's irrelevant. Then I'll go ahead and set the subject, and the subject will be as MMO accounts password. Our view name will be reset password. We won't change that. And the to is going to be user.email because that's the email address that we're going to be sending that email to. Okay, well, the last thing that we have to do for this stage of the password reset token is to jump into our views. There we go. And then jump into our users mailer, and then jump into our reset password.system. I'm also going to jump into our verify email because pretty much we're going to be doing the same exact thing. In fact, I'm just going to take the verify email. I'm going to select all, copy, jump into reset password, and paste it. Replace welcome with hello. Replace the token URL with, instead of verify on register, we want to do verify, or how about, what should we do? What should we call this name for our reset password action that's used to actually reset the password? What do we want to call it? How about just reset? and then we'll call the controller name password reset. And then we'll say, please click here to reset your password. If you did not send us a request to reset your password, please disregard this email. Your password has not changed. So in case somebody did manage to like reset another, or try to attempt to reset another person's password, we'll put a little note in there saying that if this wasn't a valid request, then just disregard the email, because the attacker won't be able to successfully reset the password unless they get the token. And if your email account is ever compromised, your existence on the internet has virtually been compromised as well. So, yeah, it's safe to assume that an attacker who knows the email address of somebody probably doesn't have access to their email account. And if they do, well, like I said, then you have bigger problems. Okay, so now that we have our mailer done, I'm going to jump into my web.config and make sure that we're using, we're using Mandrill, so I will actually get a real email when I try to reset my password. So that's good. Just to go over what we've done so far, we've added our reset password token and our reset password token expires at properties to our user. We've created the proper method for generate reset password token. We've created a basic controller that will allow us to generate that token, and it'll send us our email and will redirect us to the confirm page or the confirmation page. I'll hit F6 to compile, and then I'll come back to our page and refresh. Let's first test an obviously invalid email. So I'm just going to type in some garbage, hit reset password, and we have a slight typo on our header. Ignore me for a second while I fix that. Password reset, confirm. Oh, come on. And Visual Studio's frozen. There we go. Okay, so it says check your email. Password reset link has been sent to your email address. Of course, we know that that didn't actually happen because this was an invalid email. Let me pull up MySQL Workbench and figure out. I forgot which user had. Okay, nlac5 has my email. So let's go ahead and type in my email into this and hit reset password. It says check your email. A password reset has been sent to your email address. Where do I have? I have my email open on one of these tabs. The millions of tabs that I have. And indeed, let me pop this out so I can show you guys. We do have a reset your Buzz MMO account's password. It says please click here to reset your password. If you did not send this request, disregard the email or copy and paste the following link. We can also go into MySQL Workbench and verify that that token was indeed saved to the database. In addition to being saved to the database, oh, come on. You're not going to do this to me, are you? There we go. We see that in 30 minutes from now, in UTC, of course, not my local time zone, but in 30 minutes from now, our reset password token will be invalid. So that's really cool. Now that we have our email being created, we can try hitting the click here button, but that's just going to send us to a 404 page. That's because we haven't implemented the reset action yet on our password reset controller. So let's go ahead and do that. Jumping into our password reset controller, I'm going to say public AR, what did I call this again? Reset. And then I'll say string token. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a user. So I'm going to say var user equals database dot users dot single or default. F goes into F. Password reset password token equals token. if user is null, now we have to decide how we want to handle the error condition. I think what I'm going to do is, to keep things as simple as possible, I'm going to go ahead and two options here. I can create a unique action, controller action, for every outcome of this method. What are the outcomes? Well, there's an outcome for a token not found. There's an outcome for a token being expired. And there's the outcome of the user successfully resetting their password or being presented with a form that allows them to reset their password. Instead of combining those all into a single action, I'm going to go ahead and not do that. So I'm going to say return, if the user is null, return redirect to action. And I'll do, the action name is error. Or actually, what I could do is I could link them back to the index page with a enumeration value indicating what kind of error resulted in them being sent back to the reset password page itself. I think that would give us the best user experience. So instead of returning them to error, I'll return them to index. And inside of index, I'm going to have or inside of this, I'm going to have a route value called error equals, and then I'm going to say password reset error dot token not found. Now, password reset error is going to be an enumeration that I'll create here momentarily in our view models namespace. But for now, let's go ahead and finish out this method at least, so that we can add that enumeration here in a moment, because we're also going to need to add a view model as well. Okay, so if the user is null, that means we didn't find the password token. Next, we can say if user dot reset password token expires at, if this date time is greater than or smaller than date time dot UTC now. Again, it's also that brought in using system at the top. Again, it's important that we compare it with UTC now and not now, because that would result in time zone issue. So if the reset password token expires at is smaller than now, that means now is greater than when it expires, which means it has expired, we'll return redirect to action index with a new error equals password reset error dot token expired. Okay, so if the token wasn't found, we return them to the index. If the token was found but was expired, we return them to the index. Now we know that we have a valid token, so we want to present them with a form that'll allow them to type in a new email address. So I'm going to say return view. I'm going to type in new password reset password reset. Again, the naming convention I use for my view models is controller name followed by action name. So that's why this view model looks a little ugly, but we're going to keep with it. So I'll return a new view, password reset, and I'm trying to think if I need to fill it with anything. I guess I could fill it with the username, so I could present the user with a message, hello, or welcome back, blah, 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 please reset your password. Because at this point we know that it's them, or at least we know it's somebody with access to their email. So we can go ahead and greet them, and that'll be nice, I guess. So I'll say username equals user.username. Now before I go in my view models namespace and actually write my view models and my enums, I'm going to add another controller action called reset that takes in a token as well as a password reset form, which will just simply return view form, and it'll be annotated with the HTTP post method or attribute. Okay, so now that we have all of this done, let's do one more thing in the controller. I want to pass in what error was passed into the index action into the view model that is on the view, so that the view itself can detect which error was returned, so it can display a message to the user. So what I'm going to do is in the index, I'm going to say password reset error question mark error. So this means, again, because password reset error is going to be an enumeration, which is a value type, we're going to want to make this nullable because you can get to the index page without having an error already. So now what we have to do is we have to pass the error into our password reset index view model. So I'll simply say error equals error. Now remember, error doesn't exist yet, but it will here momentarily when we fix up our view model namespace. All right, so that's what I want to do in the password reset controller for now. Let's go ahead and fix up our view models. The first thing that we need to do is we need to get that enum in. So I'm going to create a new enum called password reset error with a token not found and a token expired member. So the password reset error enum has token not found and token expired. For our members, notice how that gets rid of quite a few different errors on this controller page. The next thing I want to do is I want to go into my password reset index, which remember is under our view models namespace. Password reset index is going to have a public password reset error member that's nullable, and it's going to be called error with a public getter and a public setter. So we're just adding that member to our view model. Now that makes that error go away. Now if we scroll down, the last thing we have to do in our view models is create our password reset view model. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to jump into my view models namespace and I'm going to add a password reset view model. It's going to have a public string username. Then we're going to have a public string new password, which is going to be required. It's going to have a data type of password, and it's going to have a display name of new space password, so that when we generate the proper label for it, it'll appear correctly. Then we'll have another, well, let's not do the attributes first, let's do the property first. We'll have another one called new password confirm, which is required. It has a data type of password and a display name of confirm new password. It'll also have another attribute called confirm, or I forgot. Give me 1 second. Register. It's called compare. So we'll have another attribute called compare, and we'll pass in the string of new password, so that our new password confirm, it needs to be the same value as the new password in order for this form to post correctly. Otherwise, ASP.NET MVC will throw an error. Okay, now that we've done our controller and our view models, let's go ahead and work on our views. If we go back into our controller, we'll see that we need a view for our reset action. And we'll also need to modify our view in our index action to display an error if that error has been set. Let's do that first. Let's jump into the view of our password reset index, which is going to be under views, password reset, index. And then at the top, I'm going to say if model error equals, I could do a switch here too, I guess, but switches look kind of ugly in Razor, so I'm not going to worry about it. Password reset error dot token expired. Actually, I'm just going to display the exact same error message regardless of what error it was. Oh, it's not going to matter because it's going to be in the URL anyway. So I'll go ahead and keep doing what I'm doing. You'll notice that by doing this password reset error.token expired, I got a using statement at the top that says using BuzzMMO web view models. Also notice that in Razor, I do not need to prefix this if statement with an @ sign. And that's because I'm already inside of a block. I'm inside of the using block. And there's no HTML between these two statements. Therefore, you don't have to put in an @ sign unless you're printing something to the screen, like what we're doing here with validation summary. So in this error, I'll say your password reset token has expired. Please try again. Then I'll do an else if model error equals password reset error dot token not found. Invalid password reset URL. I guess we could say. I don't want to say password reset token because that might, well, You guys can worry about your own wording. Wording's irrelevant. The point is that we now display the error if they got sent back to this index page and they're advised to try again. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our password reset view. So going into Solution Explorer, I'm going to go onto the password reset folder, and I'm going to add a new Razor MVC view called reset. The reset view is going to have a model of password reset, which of course will autocomplete as Buzz MMO web view models password reset. I'm going to delete all the other code in this page. Then I'm going to say, have an H1, I'm going to say, welcome back, model.username. Please enter your, or I'll do that in a paragraph. Or please create a new password below. HTML begin form. Well, first we'll want HTML validation summary, then we'll want form group, HTML.label for, F goes into F, new password, HTML.password for, F goes into new password, div class form group. Of course, I am forgetting to add the form control class to my password for. Then I'll do label for f.new password confirm HTML password for f new password confirm new class equals form control. Then I'll say input type equals submit value equals reset password class equals button small button. Is it primary or is it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's primary for the blue button. Okay. So now if I go ahead and hit F6 and I come back here to the password reset form with that token, hit refresh. Remember, I got this URL from my email. Say, welcome back, nlock5, please create a new password below. New password, confirm new password. Now when I hit reset password, my username will disappear. We'll fix that in a second. The important bit is that confirm new password and, yep. Okay, so our page does indeed work. Our confirmation works and our required works. Alrighty, so now that we've done that, we can finally implement the actual logic for resetting a user's password. Let's come back to register or password reset controller and implement the final bit of logic that we need to finish this system. Okay, so our reset post action is going to say var user equals database users single or default. T goes into T reset password token equals token. If user is null, return redirect to action index new error equals token not found. Now you might be saying, well, why are we revalidating this stuff? I mean, not only are we going to be revalidating our the existence of a token, but we're also going to be revalidating the expiration date. Well, that's because in reality, due to the stateless nature of HTTP, a person can post directly to this action by either crafting a form themselves or using any of the many different tools, such as Postman, to create a request directly to this action. And since they can do that at any time, we want to revalidate all of our assumptions before we continue on with resetting the password to make sure that we're not opening up a potential attack vector. Now that we've done that, we are going to set form.username equals user.username. That's because form.username does not get carried over when we post, because we don't actually have on our form the username field being printed out on, so we have to reset it to the user. Then we're going to do if not model state is valid, return view form. So if there was a validation error somewhere, simply return the view form to show the user their errors. Next up, let's actually finally reset the user's password. I'm going to say user dot set password form dot new password database save changes. All right, we're finally at the end of this process. So what do we want to do when a user properly resets their password? There's a couple of right answers for this, or a couple of answers that you can come up with depending on how you want the flow to work. But for simplicity's sake, all I'm going to do is I'm going to log the user in automatically, auth.user equals user. Then I'm going to redirect them to the home page. So I'm going to redirect them to the index action on the home controller. So that's it. All we do is we revalidate our assumptions, making sure that the reset password token exists and that it hasn't expired. We update the form's username to the user's real username so that we don't have to carry that data along with the post request. We make sure the form is valid, which means that they've typed in a password and the password matches the password confirmation. We've actually set the password on the user. We've done the resetting. We've logged in the user and we've redirected them to the index action. The final thing that we need to do is clear out the user's reset token, because we don't want this token to be able to be used more than one time for obvious security reasons. So after we set the password, I'm going to say user dot clear reset password token. So I'm going to write a method on the user entity called clear reset password token. It's important that I do this before save changes, of course. So I'm going to generate this method stub, and then I'm going to put it above our private string generate random token method. So this clear reset password token method has been added to our user entity, which of course exists in our buzzmmo.data.entities namespace. The clear reset password token method is just going to say reset password token equals null and reset password token expires at equals null. All right, let's test this. I'm going to hit F6. I'm going to come back here and refresh the page. First of all, I'm going to test the expiration date. So I'm going to come in here to my database and I'm going to modify the expiration date. Let's say it expired last year. And I'm going to hit apply. Come back here and refresh and make sure I get kicked back. And I did. It says reset password. Your password reset token has expired. Please try again. So let's go ahead and type in my email address. I'm going to say nelsonlekay@gmail.com reset password, which will send me an email. I'm sitting over here on my email on the other screen. Here it is. So I'm going to say click here, which is going to redirect me to the reset action with the token appended in the URL. My new password, I'm going to do test123, confirm new password test123. I'm going to hit reset password. Now I'm logged in. Let's check the database to make sure that my reset password token was nulled out. It was. Now let's log out and log back in. So I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to log in as nlac5. I'm going to type in a password of test123, hit login, and we indeed see that the password was reset. All right, so now we have a secure method of resetting the user's password by using tokens. Wasn't a terrible lot of code, but it certainly did take a while to type out. Let's go ahead and see exactly how much code that was. If we look at our changes, we modified the user entity, of course, by adding the appropriate values. And we refactored our token generation logic into these methods. We fixed up our register controller to use the newly refactored methods on our user entity. We updated our user mailer for our reset password token, email. We updated our login.cshtml to include a forgot your password link. Then we modified the reset password.cshtml, or rather, modified the mailer to include our token in the email. We generated our migrations. We then created our password reset controller, which has an index action, a confirm action, and a reset action. We then created our appropriate view models for our reset and our error, and modified our index. We then wrote our confirm page to tell them to check their email. We created our index page to allow them to type in their email. And then we created the reset page to allow them to reset their password. So yeah, that pretty much finishes up that feature. So I'm going to go ahead and commit it. I'm going to say added reset password feature and commit. And I think that pretty much wraps everything up. So we'll see you guys in the next video.